Welcome back to Investing Talk Podcast. All right, so today we're going to take a look at Apple.
Okay.
You sent over some pretty interesting information about their recent stock activity, kind of how they're positioned in the market overall. And I think our mission today is to try to distill all this down, figure out what's really important, for the average person out there to understand.
We have some recent data points on Apple's stock price, some solid analysis of their financial performance, and then just kind of a breakdown of some recent news that could be impacting the stock. So let's break it down and see what we can learn.
Yeah, let's jump into it.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's start with the recent stock price action. Right now, it's sitting at about $218.27. One thing that jumped out to me was the fact that it's up almost 2% in the last 24 hours, 1.95% to be exact. But looking at the 52-week range, it's been all over the place. I mean, it's gone from $164.08 all the way up to $260.10. That's a pretty big swing, right?
It is. A range like that really highlights the volatility we've seen in the market over the past year, especially in the tech sector.
Definitely. Now, another thing that I noticed was the trading volume. It was 94.1 million shares, which is actually below the average volume of 49.5 million. I mean, you'd think with the price going up like that, the volume would be higher, wouldn't you?
You would. And that lower volume could actually be a cause for, a little bit of caution. It might suggest that this recent price increase isn't driven by a huge amount of buying enthusiasm.
Interesting. So what could be causing that? I mean, why would the volume be so low when the price is rising?
Well, it could be that, just a smaller number of investors are pushing the price up, maybe some big institutional buyers. Or it could even be, algorithmic trading, computers making trades based on certain triggers.
Right. Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So should we be worried about this low volume?
Not necessarily worried, but it's definitely something to keep an eye on. I mean, it's just a little signal that maybe the market isn't completely convinced about this upward trend.
Gotcha. So moving on, let's talk about their financial strength. And there's really no other way to put it. Their financials are absolutely incredible. I mean, in fiscal year 2024, they brought in $391 billion in revenue. That makes them the biggest tech company in the world by revenue. And on top of that, they had an operating income of $123 billion and a net income of $94 billion. How does that kind of revenue, just the sheer size of it, factor into your overall understanding of Apple's position in the market?
That massive revenue number, it really underscores Apple's dominance, right? It shows you how deeply embedded their products and services are in our lives. And it's not just about iPhones anymore. They've built this whole ecosystem, with their Macs, iPads, their services like Apple TV plus Star, Apple Music. All of that contributes to these huge revenue numbers.
Yeah, right. So beyond just the impressive figures themselves, what does this tell us about their strategy and their future prospects?
Well, it gives them a lot of options, right? They have a huge amount of cash flow, and that means they can reinvest heavily in research and development, which is absolutely crucial in the tech world.
Definitely. You got to stay ahead of the curve.
Exactly. And they can also use that cash to, return value to shareholders through dividends and stock buybacks. Or they could even go on a shopping spree, acquire other companies that fit into their strategic vision. So having that much financial firepower gives them a lot of flexibility.
It's like they're playing chess while everyone else is playing checkers.
Yeah.
All right, so let's shift gears a little bit and talk about some of the key factors that could be influencing their stock price right now. Obviously, we've already talked about their crazy strong financial performance, but what are some of the other things investors are paying attention to?
Well, first and foremost, their ability to keep innovating is key. I mean, they've got to keep coming up with new products and services, improving their existing lineup.
Right, new iPhones, new Macs, new everything.
Exactly. And not just hardware, but also software and services. Think about things like advancements in artificial intelligence, maybe augmented reality, new features for Apple Music, stuff like that. That's what keeps people excited about Apple.
Makes sense. So what about external factors, things outside of Apple's control?
Oh, those definitely play a role. The overall health of the tech sector, for example. If tech stocks in general are doing well, that tends to lift all boats, even a giant like Apple.
Right. So a rising tide lifts all ships, as they say.
Exactly. On the flip side, if there's a downturn in the tech sector, that could drag Apple down too, even if they're doing everything right. And then there's competition. Companies like Samsung, Google, they're always trying to chip away at Apple's market share.
Yeah, you got to stay on your toes.
Absolutely. And then there's the broader economic picture. Things like inflation, interest rates, they affect how much money people have to spend on discretionary items like, high-end electronics.
So if people are feeling squeezed financially, they might be less likely to upgrade their iPhone or buy a new Mac, even if they want to.
Exactly. And then there are things like regulatory and environmental concerns. We've seen increased scrutiny from regulators in areas like app store policies and potential anti-competitive practices. These ongoing investigations can create uncertainty for investors and potentially lead to changes in Apple's business model.
Oh, for sure. I mean, those are all things investors need to be aware of.
And one more thing to consider is just general market volatility. The stock market can be a bit of a roller coaster sometimes, and those ups and downs can affect Apple's stock price too, even if it has nothing to do with their underlying business.
Right. Even the best companies can get caught up in market swings.
Yeah.
Okay, so you've also taken a look at some technical analysis. What can you tell us about that?
Well, the recent price increase we talked about, that does suggest some resilience, which is a good sign.
That's encouraging.
Yeah. However, the lower than average trading volume, as we discussed, that could indicate some hesitation in the market.
Right, so a bit of a mixed bag.
Exactly. And unfortunately, we don't have the specific data on the 50-day and 200-day moving averages or the RSI. Those are technical indicators that can give us more insight into the stock's momentum and whether it's overbought or oversold.
So without that information, it's tough to make a strong call on the stock right now from a technical perspective.
It is. It's kind of like having a puzzle with some of the pieces missing.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So based on what we do know, what's the current recommendation?
The recommendation for now is to hold existing positions. Basically, sit tight and wait for more data to come in. Keep an eye on the volume, the RSI, and those moving averages, and see if any clearer trends emerge.
So a cautious approach. Don't buy, don't sell, just wait and see.
Exactly. There's no need to make any rash decisions right now.
Gotcha. Okay, so let's talk about how different types of investors might view Apple. A lot of people see it as a great long-term growth opportunity. Do you agree with that assessment?
I do. I think Apple's track record speaks for itself. They've consistently innovated, built a hugely loyal customer base, and they've managed to stay ahead of the curve in a very competitive industry.
Right, so for someone who's looking to invest for the long haul, Apple could be a solid choice.
Absolutely. Now, of course, past performance is no guarantee of future results, but I think Apple is well positioned for continued growth.
And what about investors who are looking for a bit more diversification in their portfolio? Could Apple fit that bill?
Definitely. I mean, Apple is a tech company, but it's also so much more than that. They're in hardware, software, services, and they have a global reach. So adding Apple to a portfolio that's maybe a little too concentrated in one sector could definitely provide some balance.
Gotcha. And for income-oriented investors, Apple does offer a dividend, although it's not huge. It's around 0.43% to 0.44% right now.
Right. The dividend isn't going to be a major draw for most Apple investors, but it's still a nice little bonus, and it shows that they're committed to returning value to their shareholders.
For sure. Now, it's not all sunshine and rainbows, right? There are some potential challenges that investors should be aware of.
Absolutely. We touched on a few earlier, like supply chain disruptions and regulatory scrutiny. Those are definitely things to keep in mind.
And those are things that could impact their bottom line.
It could. And there's always the risk of new competition emerging or existing competitors becoming more aggressive. The tech world moves fast, and you can never rest on your laurels.
True enough. All right, so taking all of this into account, what are your main takeaways for our listeners? What are the key things they should be thinking about when it comes to Apple?
I think the most important takeaway is that Apple is a complex company operating in a complex environment. There are a lot of moving parts, and it's important to consider all of them before making any investment decisions.
Right. Don't just look at the stock price or the latest headlines. You got to dig deeper.
Exactly. Look at the financials. Consider the broader market trends, think about the regulatory landscape, and of course, don't forget about the competition.
So, do your homework.
Exactly. And be prepared for the long haul. Investing in a company like Apple is not a get-rich-quick scheme. It's about patience and taking a long-term view.
Makes sense. Well, I think this has been a really insightful conversation.
I agree.
It's amazing to see how a company like Apple, which is already so huge, can continue to innovate and grow. And it's certainly giving me a lot to think about.
Me too.
And for all of our listeners out there, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment if you found this deep dive helpful. Let us know if there are other areas you'd like us to explore.
We appreciate you tuning in.
Thanks for listening.